we offer you the program based on the results of the studies of the Islamic theologian Dr. Gasanov, Russia, Dagestan. For several decades, Dr. Hassan Hassanov from Dagestan has been studying the Quran, comparing the theoretical calculations and developments of scholars of academic science with the verses of the Holy Scripture. Basis of genetics, genetic engineering. He is Allah, God, the Creator, the Maker, the Designer. His are the most beautiful names. Wherever is in the heavens and the earth glorifies Him. He is majestic, the wise. The Quran, Surah 59, Ayah 24. And the earth is set up for the creatures, and in it are fruits, and palms in clusters, and grains in the blades, and fragrant plants. So which of your Lord's marvels will you deny? The Quran, Surah 55, ayahs from 10 to 13. Praise the name of your Lord the Most High, He who creates and regulates, He who measures and guides, He who produces the pasture and then turns it into light debris. The Quran, Surah 87, ayahs from 1 to 5. Before we understand the basis of genetic, we will ponder over the names attributes of the Creator. The Lord and His Word, addressed to a man, informs about what He created, proportioned and directed all things. It is logical to assume that the creation of the Lord, the Creator, did not appear in the finished form, but developed over the course of certain stages. We will try to disassemble it below. Verily, Allah, giving way to the grain and the bone, exhales the living from the dead and brings the dead out of the living. This is Allah for you. How much you are deceived. The Quran, Surah 6, Ayah 95. If one asks how the Lord gives the way to a grain and a seed, then the answer is found in the Quranic sign described in Surah 6, verse 99. And it is He who sends down water from the sky. With it we produce vegetation of all kinds, from which we bring greenery, from which we produce grains in clusters, and palm trees with hand in clusters, and vineyards, and olives, and pomegranates, similar and dissimilar. Watch their fruits as they grow and ripen. Surely, and these are signs for people who believe. The Quran, Surah 6, Ayah 99. In this verse, it is not said about the present tense, we bring greenery, which would have a completely different meaning, but it's meant we bring greenery from which we produce grains in clusters. Grains in clusters are nucleotides in DNA that make up long chains where information on the structure of all proteins and the cells is stored. From the foregoing sign, we bring greenery, it follows that the matrix of the genetic code, that is, its way of recording in modern language, has already been complied. Allah the Almighty in the past tense says, we bring greenery. That is, in modern scientific language it means created a matrix or programmed a genetic DNA code that carries all the information about the structure of the protein. According to the scientific data, this code has never changed since the compilation. His decoding is one of the greatest achievements of the 20th century. However, pay attention, even in the 7th century, the Lord informs about this in the Quran. Greenery, that is, the genetic code is already compiled and universal, one for all living creatures on earth. For bacteria, a human being, wheat, and sheep, the same triplets encode the same amino acid in different versions. The words of Allah from which we produce grains in clusters, as if saying about the order of amino acid in the primary structure of the protein determined by the sequence of nucleotides in the DNA molecule. Amino acids in the protein form long chains. They are made according to a given program of the genetic code. The molecules that make up proteins usually contain several hundred amino acids similar to beads or bracelets. And do not corrupt on earth after its reformation, and pray to Him with fear and hope. God's mercy is close to the doers of good. The Quran, Surah 7, Ayah 56. Around the 1980s, scientists found out that genes in DNA spirals contain information on protein structure. However, proteins, although they are organic substances, are not yet an organism. These are just the bricks from which the body is built. One needs a plan to build it, a program that indicates where to put a brick, protein. However, there was no such program in the genes. It turned out that the genetic code takes only 1% of the length of the chain of the double helix DNA. Scientists consider it secondary. The remaining 99% of proteins, which biologists call junk, part of the DNA, but the Lord did nothing in vain. In the 90th of the 20th century, experiments were conducted with embryos, providing them with all the conditions for their development: nutrient medium, air, temperature, and moisture regime. In this case, the embryo was placed in a metal bomb to fend off all external radiation. It is established that under such conditions, the embryo develops in a completely different direction. It turns into a formless structure and dies. This fact suggests that the information laid down in the genes is clearly not enough to grow a corresponding organism. The embryo must receive some information from outside, dictating the sequence of its development and its other parameters. It turned out that this external information is a program carried by special electromagnetic waves. This information is taken precisely by the garbage part of the DNA, and then by means of microwaves passes it to each cell, determining how to develop it and what place to take in the course of the organism development. Scientists found out that around the body there is an information energy field that envelopes it and carries a hologram of its image in space. Information coming from outside makes chromosomes create a certain wave holographic image. And when the cells, for example, of the human embryo begin to divide, it is this image hologram that indicates in what form and how all organs of the system should develop. Thus, it turns out that every living being develops according to the given wave hologram. Some super-powerful genetic computer that programs the future organism and describes its backup capabilities generates it. This supercomputer sends the necessary commands, which are detected with the help of special standing waves, solitons, arising in the DNA of the germ cells. This is the way a holographic image of the future biosystem of a man, as well as the entire viral, microbial, plant and animal world is created. I have placed my trust in God. my Lord and your Lord. There is not a creature but he holds it by the forelock. My Lord is on the straight path. The Quran, Surah 11, Ayah 56. In laboratories, scientists began various manipulations with genes and their introduction into other organisms. Genetic engineering has started to develop actively, although not being a science. Nevertheless, it actively uses modern achievements in cellular and molecular biology, genetics, microbiology, and virology. A man having realized the essence of the gene, its importance for proteins, read the code of genomes of living organisms and naturally did not stop there. In the souls of the people arose a strong desire to create the animal and plant world of the planet at its discretion, and by the end of the first decade of the 21st century, mankind has achieved this great success. Scientists have learned to isolate the gene from the body and synthesize it in the laboratory, mastered the technology of modifying the gene to make it the right structure, found ways of introducing the transformed gene into the nucleus of the cell and attaching it to existing genetic formations. All this became possible thanks to enzymes, protein-based formations responsible for organizing the work of the cell. Picking up a set of such enzymes, one can easily dismember the molecule into the required parts, then to connect them but in a new way. A hybrid unlike anything is created. Such information in gene engineering is called the vector. Its main task is the transfer of a new reproduction program to a living organism intended for its purpose. And do not corrupt on earth after its reformation, and pray to him with fear and hope. God's mercy is close to the doers of good. The Quran, Surah 7, Ayah 56. Today, the successes and achievements of genetic engineering are visible to the naked eye, for example, in agriculture, where it achieved impressive results. Since the beginning of the 1980s, many genetically modified varieties of grain crops have been obtained. At the end of the first decade of the 21st century, they planted 120 million hectares of land around the world. The highest level of yields, its resistance to unfavorable climatic conditions, and the complete absence of parasites devouring cereals have been noted. The potatoes, maize, soybean, rice, rape, and cucumber varieties that have not been seen before are produced. The number of plant species to which genetically engineered methods have been successfully applied exceeds 50. Genetic engineering can cross tomatoes with potatoes, cucumbers with onions, grapes with watermelon. The possibilities here are simply stunning. The size and mouth-watering fresh look of the product can pleasantly surprise anyone. Soon there will be no need for chemical means to control harmful insects, since molecules of DNA, certain type of bacteria introduced into the vegetable cell, fruit or grain culture, will destroy both the Colorado beetle, the cotton scoop, and the leaf litter, and many other pests of agricultural lands. Animal husbandry is also in the zone of genetic engineering interests. Studies on the creation of transgenic sheep, pigs, cows, rabbits, ducks, geese, chickens are now considered a priority. Great attention is also paid to animals that could synthesize various medications, insulin, hormones, interferon, amino acids. The creation of this type of biological medicine will cost 20 times cheaper than those produced with traditional chemistry. Thanks to cloning, it is possible to reproduce very valuable breeds of cattle and sheep and pigs and racehorses and rare breeds of dogs. An example is the Dolly lamb, successfully cloned from the cage of another adult being. She was born in the UK on July 5, 1996, lived 6 2.5 years and died on February 14, 2003. In general, we can consider the experience with the sheep successful. They are already thinking about cloning a person. Judging by the success of genetic engineering in a relatively short period, there is no doubt about it. Pride, admiration, delight, only such synonyms can express the whole range of feelings. However, violating the Lord's program through laboratory manipulations and genetic engineering, a person experiences the all horrible consequences of the impact of transgenic organisms. The organic world of the planet balanced by the Lord was invaded by a man. Let us give an example of the Colorado beetle, which at one time was so fond of eating potatoes. Introduced into tubers, the modified gene permanently repelled the insects' desire to attack the vegetables. The beetle just began to die out on a mass scale, and the yield of useful root crops to grow. Meanwhile, the super profit were received by agricultural producers who sold the marketable kind of potatoes and sharply increased the yield of products. However, none of the oligarchs was concerned about the issues of national security and harm to health. Protected tubers were given to try laboratory mice. After a short period, they developed esophageal cancer. Rodents began to die as well as the Colorado beetles. Genetic engineering already causes deadly damage to agriculture, if only because genetically modified plants resistant to viruses provoke a mutation of these viruses. Those will become more dangerous, take completely different forms, and begin to attack plants, animals, and humans. Some transgenic plants are proved to release toxins and other harmful substances that can harm insects, birds, animals, and humans. The same bees eating such gene-modified substances just die, and their honey will be slowly acting poison. People know the consequence of genetically modified nutrition, but not everyone can protect himself from consumption of good and is not familiar with all the conditions of its production. It's not enough now that children are born freaks with 6 fingers, with fused legs, with complete absence of genitalia or without eyes and ears. Terrible mortal mutations may not appear immediately, but only in the 2nd or 3rd generation. In recent years, the number of cancer patients has sharply increased. This indicates that the reliable genetic apparatus created by the Lord has failed due to the fault of the rash and dangerous human intervention. Many scientists believe that the technology of genetic engineering is worse than nuclear technology. The scale of disasters may be orders of magnitude higher than we can imagine, and the degradation of people caused by the consumption of genetically modified products is beyond any measurement. And I will mislead them, and I will entice them, and I will prompt them to slit the ears of cattle, and I will prompt them to alter the creation of God. Whoever takes Satan as a lord instead of God has surely suffered a profound loss. The Quran, Surah 4, Ayah 119. This video is based on the books of Dr. Hassanov. The Quran and the Achievements of Modern Natural Science